This Christmas, give love. God's love through you. Because God's love wins in the end, we know that love can see us through. Love is the purest force in all of creation. And allow this purifying force to purify you so that people may see the light of love radiating from you with every word you speak and every action you give. With every action that you take, let love be your desired outcome. Which means there are times before we do the action, we have to pray for the Lord to purify our intentions. Let love be heard in every word that you speak, which means at times before we speak, we have to pray for the Lord to purify what we are about to say. And in this world in which we live, there is no greater force that can be offered into the world than the force of God's love that came through the Messiah. The word Messiah means anointed in Hebrew. Christ is the word Messiah in Greek. The word Jesus means that God saves. Emmanuel means that God is with us. Just in these four names, the unwrapping of the Christmas gift of love is filled with a potency that has more power than any other force in all humanity. So, let it be. Peggy Noonan, a Wall Street columnist, put it recently this way. It seems a funny thing to say about public policy, but it seems that what doesn't work in public life has to do with the absence of love. See, love is something that we can all have in our life. We may not have been loved as we wish to be loved. We may not feel like people love us as they ought to love us. We may put an arm's distance about God's love because we have been disappointed in life. But if we are willing to let down our barriers to God, we find that His love will have its way in our heart. And the hunger inside of us to truly be taken into the arms of a loving presence, holding us close, so that whatever has occurred in our life has a healing power beyond any other force in this world that then can set this love free from our life. What people most need is what you can give them year-round: Christmas love. Claim your place in God's larger love plans. A while back, I was able to be in a setting where one of our members, Fully Klingman, was being recognized, and in his recognition, there were several people who spoke from the family and from the corporate world, where Fully once had led HEB, and then in his retirement from that career, he became then a mentor and an executive coach. One of the companies that hired him to be with their CEO, where Fully then would be a part of each setting of each meeting, where this younger CEO was learning how to take on those massive corporate reins of responsibility. And in one setting, the CEO of the company was deeply concerned about the market trends and the profit losses that were happening within the company. It was an international company, and in the setting then, the CEO was speaking to a couple of the key vice presidents. And he was making the message clear to them that their performance needed to improve in order for the company to improve, in order for the company to be able to reach its potential. And in doing so, to make his point, the younger executive raised his voice and began to yell at them and discharged them from the office and slammed the door behind them. This is the young executive that's telling the story at the event that was honoring Fully. He then said, "I will always remember what Fully said to me. You need to speak your message in a way that they can hear it, in a way that will get a hold of them and can change how they're leading." And the young executive said, "Yeah, but You need to know that our company we're in a downward trend, and if my daughter was crossing the street, I wouldn't call out to her in a gentle voice, say, "Get out of the street." To which the Fully then said, "Yes, but your daughter knows that you love her." See, your voice can always be heard with love, whatever the intensity of the circumstance requires. Your action, however aggressive and assertive it is, with a desired outcome of love, can always then be measured in a way to bring a love outcome. If we really believe this, then we have really been transformed, like Anna and Gabriella, from the baptistry today into the rest of their life. And this is the transformation that our world is desperately wanting to see from the life of Christians and the work of the church to be able to see from you. And as seekers who are watching in today or here in person today, know this message is true. It has been proven for 101 generations since Christ walked this earth. It is proven in the force of the world that is ultimately our only lasting hope. So as we look at the passage that Melissa and Ethan read for us, the passage brings out the message. It lays the message out. We find in verses 16 through 18 that if we entrust our love problems to God and we don't walk away where love leads us, then we can see the pain and the plan, even taking them to bed like Joseph did, and use the language, the love language of prayer. You know that's what prayer is. Prayer is not this Christmas list like gimme, gimme, gimme. Prayer is a love language. Lord, help me to know your heart. Stretch me and know me. And in doing so, work your transformation. Grow my heart to love people to whom it's difficult, to be in situations, to be faithful where I am sweating under the pressure. Be with me when my body is racked in pain. My finances are tumbling because of COVID-19. I'm not sure how 2021 looks because of what happened in 2020. In the midst of that is a love language to God, where the Lord will say, "Be with me," and let the prayer listen as well as to speak. Do you notice how the passage opened? It was the recollection of the generations that had gone before Joseph. He was being reminded in the story about his great-great-great-grandfathers and great-great-grandfathers and great-great-and-great-and-grandfathers. And immediately before him, his dad was Jacob. These great names of old. And so what the Lord was reminding Joseph is know who you are. When he went to bed that night with his problems pressing upon him because he was between a rock and a hard place, the rock was the promise of God and his love for Mary. And the problem is that Mary was pregnant and they hadn't had intercourse. Now remember this about the virgin birth. If it's difficult to accept the virgin birth, then let me remind you the purpose of this way of God's coming into the world as the Messiah. When things in the world get wild, God can get wilder. When the problems seem so large, God comes with a bigger promise. When it seems like we can solve this on our own, God says, "This is too big for you. I'm going to come and show you the way of my promise that you can trust." But what Mary had told Joseph was too good to be true. It was too bad for him to accept. It was too exaggerated for him to believe. But he loved her, and he trusted God. And so he went to sleep that night, wanting to honor God. What keeps you up at night? What turns you over in a fidgety night of sleep at 3 a.m. that you find yourself praying through? Remember who you are and light of God's heritage of your life, his plan. Last February, when we were still traveling, and I was traveling with my son Stephen to South Central Africa, a country called Zambia, where I'd be speaking on your behalf, our togetherness as a Trinity family with the sub-Saharan African Christian movement. And I was going through Heathrow Airport in London, and my phone went off, and I looked at it, and for some reason, I went ahead and took the call. And on the other end was a 21-year-old student in San Angelo, Texas, by the name of Jackson Hollon. He said, is this Les Hollon? I said, it is. He says, you don't know me, but we're cousins. You never know on the other end what's going to happen when you say, you don't know me, but. We're cousins, and since I was 13, I've been intrigued by our genealogy, and I've been teaching myself from 13 to now about how to do genealogy and to learn about our family heritage. And I want to know if I can share some with you, and you can confirm some things with me. And I told him what I was doing and said I'd get back. Sure, I would. And so we've been in that conversation. I'm so impressed that as a teenager, being intrigued about a family story, taught himself the work of genealogy to now become very adept. 2 days ago, he sent me this photograph. It's a photograph of my grandfather, the fellow on the right-hand side, in Dublin, Texas, which is in central Texas, in front of the old home place there. And my grandfather was a butcher during the Depression and traveled central Texas just to send some money back home. And my grandmother opened that house that you see as a boarding house so they could have food to eat and just have enough money to kind of make ends meet in the midst of the most difficult of times. And there is then my grandfather and a relative to his side by the name of Bill. And you'll notice that underneath the caption, if you're able to read that, it says Bill and Les Hollon, and Les is spelled L-E-S-S. Like less than, you know. So when you say Pastor Les, I trust you're saying Pastor L-E-S and not L-E-S-S. But part of the story of we didn't come over on the Mayflower. We don't have any castles in Scotland or Ireland where we come from. One of the reasons why our name Hollon is spelled O-N and not A-N-D is what Jackson said is because some of our people didn't know how to read and write and spell, and so they just kind of spelled it out that way. And yet I find a courage in just knowing more about a heritage that goes behind me and that's a part of me. And the heritage is way beyond just what's in the DNA of our genetics. It's the heritage about God and God's promise and God's people and how the church has been my family and how the church's promise in the midst of all of our imperfections, we have served a perfect God and a perfect hope that provides the peace plan that offers peace to the world, that gives a joy that cannot be taken away because love will win, and love will win in the end. And that if we will be Christmas love people, we will give the gift that just keeps on giving. So keep loving with your heart and mind. In verse 19, Joseph was trying to figure out not just his hurt, but he was an honorable person. He knew that Mary was honorable, and life goes sideways sometimes, and this went just apparently tragically sideways, and no easy way to just kind of recoup this. And so he took this into his prayerful dream to God, and for God then to do what God will do, show him a way forward. And so that's when Gabriel showed up. Gabriella from our baptistry bears that name. Gabriel Maldonado bears that name. Gabe Alanis, who's our Trinity production director, bears that name. If you've got a Christmas name, boy, go with it now. Let it soar in your life. You're part of that naming story. And so Gabriel came in the night sleep, one of the 16 big dream stories in the Bible, and gave him a message: don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. For what has been born within Mary is the work of the Holy Spirit. The word Spirit that stirred in Genesis 1:1 over the depth of the deep waters of early creation is the same word of the Spirit that stirred with Mary to do God's wonder, and to be able to trust that promise. Yesterday, many of us were here, we were tuned in yesterday for the service of Ernie Jones, a longtime member of our church. He was a brick mason. That was his labor, kind of like a carpenter, but with bricks. Ernie was the kind of person, as his son Daryl, a member of our church, would say, when they were growing up, they never called a plumber, they never called an electrician, they never called a carpenter, they never called an auto mechanic because Dad could always do it. There's no one in my family that says that about me. He had this kind of intelligence and the strength of his mind and the capacity to learn and to figure things out and to be able to solve a problem. Ernie passed away, and it was a time to let go. He'd lived for 90 years. He'd suffered from respiratory illness. He worked and labored with every breath so well, so beautifully, loved by Francis and by family and by us as a church. And he loved us. He gave the love language of Christmas love with every act of mercy and building project at our homes and place of church. They lived their vows for more than 63 years. See, it was tough times, born in the valley in 1930, tough times through the course of their married life, but they were good times because they knew how to take their problems to the Lord and to hear the love language of God's promises speak to them. And so can we. Verses 20 and 21 then take us deeper into the story about finding God's ways to do the right thing, to take a love pause to figure out how to go forward. Love pause. That's when we're having to kind of pray in the moment. Lord, I'm about to speak, but let love be heard in my voice. I'm about to act, but let love truly be the desired outcome. That's a love pause. That's an important part of praying. Pausing to let God work the answer of our prayer into our lives and into our circumstances. If we don't allow for the love pause, we're not really praying. We're just talking about our worries. We're doing nothing more than a grocery list of praying to an idol for God to be this force to only give, so we can take. But a love pause brings us into the story of how we can be the giver as well as the receiver. And that's exactly what's going on in Joseph's life. The Lord has said, I have trusted you, Joseph. You're part of the story. Don't freak out. Get wild. Get wild enough that you can see this larger plan of what I am doing. Think about your ancestors have gone before you. There were wild times, and sometimes they messed up because they weren't willing to trust me during that moments to grow them to be bigger than their problems. But not you, Joseph of Nazareth. Not you, the builder of people. Because the word of a carpenter, tekton in the Greek, was the sign of someone who was a wise person. When a rabbi wasn't available, they would go to the tekton, they'd go to the builder and give consultation. When we were first called Christians in Antioch, today Syria, the question that began to be asked about people are, who are these followers of Christ? These people who shortly after the resurrection of Jesus had their lives transformed by the living presence of Christ, and there was transforming communities to countries to regions, and in the Roman Empire, the reason why the message of the gospel prevailed, you've heard it, they were known because of their love. See, ultimately, it is only this God love through the life of his believers, that has the power to create this transformation. You need to trust God when the pressure is on. Trust God when the pressure is on, because Emmanuel, God is with us. You're not alone. Love surrounds you in the presence. Now, we need each other. That's why we're a church family. We're in this movement of Christ that we do together, and that's why in the midst of COVID-19 we've adjusted and how we're communicating and sharing the gospel and celebrating the Christmas season, so that last Wednesday when 5 teams were formed and there were several in each team to go caroling at 15 locations, all COVID-19 protocol were in place, including the wearing of masks once we got to our destinations in our own cars. Margie Skaggs was kind enough to say to John when she got home, she said, I was able to sing in Pastor Les's group. And John says, well, I mean, how did he sing? Is he a tenor? And she said, well, I guess you could say he's a tenor. Mainly what I can say is that he sings with a happy heart. See, we can only give what we have to give, but what we have to give is what we can give. And that's the power of this gospel. We celebrate in a hope and a promise into the future. That's what, in many ways, parenting is all about. Whether you're a parent because you mentor a younger generation, you've taken some under their wings, and you've invested yourself in their life, or if you've been the dad and mother and birthing them into the world. However that is, that when you become this kind of parent, you're making a statement of hope for the future. That when you invest in your relationship, you're investing the saying love is going to win in the end. And I believe in that for this next generation. We celebrate that Sarah and Jacob have had their daughter, Junia Marie Sensenig. And in the beauty of another generation being born, that Junia is named after a leader in the Church of Rome, written about in Romans 16. And that the Sensenig family is continuing a tradition to pass on to another generation this promise about hope in the future. The willingness to go forward, to go Godward in our life. So Matthew 1, 24 and 25 kind of wraps up this encapsulated story. And in my biblical imagination, this is how I see it unfolded. The angel Gabriel had said earlier in Nazareth to Mary what was going to happen to her. And she took that message and pondered it. And then she knew she had to tell Joseph, and she did. And then she left town, because she knew Joseph was going to need time to figure this out. And she knew he could only figure it out with God's help. And that's what's going on in this night of prayerful sleep with a dream in which God spoke to Joseph. Now, what would Joseph do with it? He made the decision to go Godward. He made the decision to be right by doing right. He made the decision that he indeed was a player in God's larger purposes, and that God was trusting him with something far bigger than what he was capable of doing on his own, but that in his trust, God had saying to Joseph, I believe in you, and you can grow to be this person, to build upon all the integrity that's been grown in your life to this place. Think of all the ways that I've been faithful to you. Now trust me and go forward. Follow God's lead. Don't hold back when God's calling you to go forward. Ultimately, that would lead them to Bethlehem. And ultimately, in the sky, there were wise men coming from a far country to the east that would see a Christmas star. You've read the stories of how tomorrow night, shortly after sundown, we can look into the southwest and up into the sky and see that Christmas star, this unique constellation of Saturn and Jupiter and some other configurations of the stellar canvas of God. And to be able to see that God paints in nature, paints in his creation, if we have eyes to see what he is showing us. And so Joseph did as what Mary had done. He did as the Lord had commanded him. And the rest is the great story of God winning in the end, because love will see us through. Let us pray. We are so grateful to God that you love us to stretch us. You love us to grow us. You love us to send us out into your purpose in the world. Oh, these are wild, the times in which we're living. And we're hearing in this story of how it means to be wild for you. We truly want to go Godward, your direction. Be with us now that there's some decisions we need to make. There's some updates in our life. There's some radical love commitments that we need to make. Lead us, Lord, in your power through the Christ. Amen. And so it is, like the two baptized earlier, who made the decision to say yes. Some here, you find yourself, your heart beating a little faster. You find yourself wondering if today's when. You'll have enough faith to trust, to stir enough courage in you to say, yes, Lord, I give my life. You have a power to forgive, and you have a power to use me to say yes. That here or online, the Lord is moving in your life to also say, I want to be a part. I'm in this movement of this way of Christ. I want to be a member of Trinity. I want to be a member that's active. I want to trust in his promises, to grow in love, grow spiritually, grow in friendships, and grow by using my gifts, my talents, to grow his kingdom. All of us are challenged these days, and so there's a love message that God is saying to you for you to get updated. And so as we sing, then pray that prayer to grow in love. You may want to kneel here. I'll be glad to honor to pray with you here as together we stand and sing and respond.